All right, well, I think a few more people are trickling in, but I think we can get started. My name is Corey Cullen. I'm the Executive Director of the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming you all to our first ever alumni panel. I'm going to hand it over to our moderator in just a second, but before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes that I wanted to run through. So first, you probably all saw when you logged in that we are recording this event and it will be available tomorrow on the Kleinman Center website. Second, we encourage you all to introduce yourselves using the chat function. So if you're a student at Penn or an alum, you can let us know your school, your department, your program. And you can also use that chat to share your contact information if you'd like, kind of like like a business card drop, a virtual business card drop. And I'll also say that we're planning to spend the first half of the panel for a discussion amongst the panelists that will be moderated. And then the second half is going to be for audience questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please don't use the chat. Please use the Q&A function, because we're going to keep the chat kind of open for any of that networking, free-flowing conversation, but we're going to be pulling pretty much exclusively from the Q&A for audience questions. So please direct at any time during the discussion, please direct your audience questions there. And last, if you would like to connect with any of our featured panelists after the presentation, you can email us. We'll put the email address in the chat. It is kleinmanenergy@upenn.edu. So I'm going to briefly introduce our guests, knowing that they're going to tell you more about themselves and each of their individual stories during the panel. You'll see that they come from kind of all different corners of Penn's campus. So we're hoping to give you a real sense of the breadth of experience that they've all had. So first, our moderator is Julie Kenahan. She is an associate at Bechtel Enterprises, focusing on infrastructure development and finance. She received an MBA from Wharton in 2019, and she also has a certificate in energy management and policy from the Kleinman Center. And then our panelists, we have Miriam Posner-Harris. Miriam is Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at the Environmental League of Massachusetts. She received a Master of Public Administration from Fells and also a certificate in Energy Management and Policy in 2016. Then we have Ben Schmidt. Ben is a postdoctoral research fellow and project development scientist at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, a real mouthful. He holds a Ph.D. in physics and astronomy from Penn. And then last but not least, we have Dylan Weber. Dylan is currently with DuPont as an operations leader. He graduated from Penn also in 2016 with an undergraduate degree with majors in chemical and biomolecular engineering and economics. It's incredibly impressive. And while he was at Penn, he worked at the Kleinman Center as a research assistant. So I want to welcome you all. Thank you so much for being here today. We're incredibly happy that we were able to pull this together. And I am going to hand things over to Julie to kick us off.
Thanks, Corey. Welcome, everyone. And I hope that today can be helpful for you, especially for the students who are preparing for new careers. So I wanted to start off just with a quick, have a little bit more detail to introduce our panelists. So let's just start with a quick introduction of who you are, how did you participate in the Penn community, and a bit more about what your career looks like today and how it relates to energy. So Ben, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And thanks so much, Julie and Corey. It's great to be at the Kleinman Center and great to be back virtually at Penn, even if we can't be there in person today. So I'm from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, where right now I'm working on a team that's developing new telescopes and infrastructure to probe the cosmic microwave background in both polarization and temperature at the Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station in Antarctica. And that's an extension of the work that I did while I was at Penn doing my PhD on the Atacama Cosmology Telescope project, which is a high altitude project in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, also dedicated to looking at the cosmic microwave background, or that oldest light relic radiation of the primordial universe. In between that, though, is I think what's maybe relevant to this panel. I took time, which ended up being 4 years, and worked at the U.S. Department of State, where I focused on introducing science and technology policy wherever possible in traditional foreign policy and national security areas, in particular focusing on transatlantic energy security and national security goals. which we can talk about. And as a result of that, one could say detour, I'm actually still doing independent writing and speaking on critical energy security and national security issues in the transatlantic space. So that's really where I'm coming from, and look forward to this panel.
Great, thanks, Ben. Miriam, how about you tell us about yourself and your journey at Penn and in your career in energy?
Great, thanks, Julie, and thank you to Corey and the Kleinman Center team for organizing this panel. My name is Miriam Posner-Harris. You said I got an MPA from the Fels Institute of Government in 2016. And I think I was part of the first class to receive the certificate in energy management and policy, and was a research assistant at the Kleinman Center. I currently serve as the VP for Strategic Partnerships at the Environmental League of Massachusetts. We're the oldest environmental advocacy organization in our Commonwealth. My role includes managing a working alliance between our organization and some of the state's biggest corporate actors. And I educate them about the business case for clean energy and climate policies that, if well designed, they can both protect our environment and foster a thriving economy. And then I sort of activate them as advocates for state level policy change to our governor and our legislature. I also have experience in energy and climate policy at the federal level, which we can get into later as well, but just broad scope of experience. Excited to be here.
Thanks, Miriam. And Dylan, we'll end with you.
Yeah, thanks, Julie, and as the others shared as well, happy to be here and really thankful for the Kleinman Center for putting on an awesome event. As Corey mentioned, I'm Dylan Weber. I'm currently an ops leader at DuPont. We make, at my facility, we make some consumables that go into the semiconductor industry wafer processing. So things like assisting in miniaturization of chips so that we can have more sensors in, autonomous vehicles. Some of the other sites in our group help to reduce, car weight, making lightweight materials to result in energy efficiency. I was at Penn for chemical engineering and economics, graduated in 2016 and spent about a year and a half working as a research assistant for the Kleinman Center, and really had, coming into Penn, really wanted to explore the different aspects of engineering and energy. Obviously, there's a lot of intersection between economics, policy, but certainly fundamentally this becomes an engineering problem, which really drove my passion for it, and why I went into chemistry and chemical engineering. Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more on other topics. Thanks, Julie.
Great, thanks, Dylan. Yeah, we have a diverse set of backgrounds and current paths forward in careers. I'll tell you all a bit about myself too. I also come from an engineering background. I studied environmental engineering at Johns Hopkins and worked in consulting at Accenture for a while, helping utilities clients improve their programs for customer energy efficiency and demand response. And when I came to Wharton, I really wanted to just broaden my horizons in the energy industry, learn a bit more about the business and finance side of some of these things. So it was great to have that knowledge that I was learning at Wharton, but then through the Kleinman Center, I was able to get some more up-to-date knowledge on policy as well. So it was a really well-rounded educational opportunity for me. And through recruiting with Wharton, I was able to make the next step in my career at Bechtel Enterprises, where currently I spend most of my time doing project development for renewable power projects, which is very exciting and not something I thought I would have been able to do before I came to Penn. So lots of opportunities can open up for you, and even opportunities that you may not have thought you would see. So let's go into a bit more detail from our panelists. How did you find your jobs, and what can students do while they're still at Penn to line up their careers? And Ben, you have a story of non-traditional networking working out for you. So let's hear that one first.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely a story that I would just say at the outset, I wouldn't recommend as a guaranteed career path or some way to get you through your major career decisions. But I will say what happened. So as I said, while I was at Penn, I had the exciting opportunity to work on a high altitude telescope project in northern Chile. And as a part of that, we were building a new camera that had detectors that can measure the cosmic microwave background in both temperature and polarization. It's a large scale camera. It's in terms of size, it's about 1 meter in diameter and 2 meters in length, a cylindrical camera. And when we got that camera, it was painted a drab yellow. And I sat around with my thesis advisor, Professor Mark Devlin, in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Penn, and we kind of, kicked around, could we paint racing stripes on this? Could we, do other sort of patterns? What could we do? So we decided we would open it up to the Penn community and have students basically compete to be the one to paint a design on the camera, with the only stipulation that it had to, at least in some way, embody the sort of science research that we were doing, looking at the primordial universe. So to that end, we opened that up, especially to the fine arts school and the design school, and in part because it was summer, and in part because we didn't have as many connections over there. We didn't really get any responses, but we did get interest from Professor Jackie Tileson at the Fine Arts School. And ultimately, she and her husband were able to basically paint a large-scale mixed mural diptych painting that embodied the growth of structure in the universe from the cosmic microwave background through today, and in a very abstract way. So she painted this diptych painting. It was presented at a First Fridays event in Old City at an art gallery. It was then photographed and printed on high resolution auto body wrap material, and then wrapped onto the telescope. We brought it down to Chile for deployment in 2013, and between 2013 and 2015 basically brought it up to full deployment. And in that period of time, we realized that we had deployed not only one of the highest altitude telescopes in the world, ground-based telescopes in the world, but also one of the highest altitude contemporary art installations, unbeknownst to us. So as a part of this, we had some interest in, whatever happened to that painting after a few years, the original painting that we could have as the basis of this project, and maybe we could display it on campus. So I was sent over to that same gallery in Old City that had hosted the First Friday event, and it turns out that the owner of that gallery was also the honorary consul of Switzerland in Philadelphia, and wanted to work on an outreach project associated with this. So as a result of that, I became heavily involved in an outreach project called the Articama Project, to kind of join fine arts with our cosmology research. And we were able to use this as a vehicle for critical outreach, not only in the Penn community. We had an art opening with the painting itself and some of the hardware from our instrument, but also in the Chilean community, and that involved working with their diplomatic community, and then also working with some of their infrastructure and science federal agency personnel to look at how can we better work with the Chilean government, and how can they better expand their role as a truly global leader in the ground-based astronomy community. Chile, if you're not aware, is really a nexus of telescope infrastructure, doing really world-class research in hosting international projects. So in the course of that period of time, as I was starting to write my thesis, there was some discussion, Ben, why don't you go and work for the State Department? You could do this. There are these science policy fellowships, and I wasn't really planning on that. I was planning on going and doing what I am currently doing at Harvard, building more telescopes, but at the South Pole. And ultimately, I did apply for the IEEE Department of State Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, and got that. I was the representative for IEEE, which is the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineering, and selected the European Energy Security team in the Department's Bureau of Energy Resources. And we can talk about that later, what I ended up focusing on there. But that's how I kind of got this entry into transatlantic security and energy security work, and really tried to work to enhance the use of science and technology analysis as a parallel to the traditional geopolitical, foreign policy, and economic analysis that's going on there. So again, not a traditional path, not something I would recommend, but something that is I guess the moral of the story that we're trying to drive home here is that there are non-traditional ways of networking, and being open-minded and kind of having that creative spirit, I think, is important as you look at next steps in your career.
Absolutely. Yeah, follow your passions, and you may see opportunities you wouldn't have thought of otherwise that come to you. So that's a great message, to just stay open. Dylan, how about you tell us a bit more about how you found your job and how Penn can help line up careers?
Sure. And full disclosure, my story is a lot less interesting maybe than Ben's, but I'd say I took a much more typical or traditional route to my career coming out of school. So, I was in the chemical engineering program right away from freshman year, spent a lot of time looking at different opportunities the summer after my freshman year, but ended up working as a cook in the restaurant that I worked on in high school that summer because I couldn't find an opportunity. Sort of the same thing the following year. So I, sent out emails to every company that was interested in engineering or oil and gas or petrochem or anything, solar power or whatever it was, sent tons and tons of emails and got mostly responses that were like, hey, we're an oil rig, we don't take college kids, leave me alone. Right. And then finally, after my junior year or during my junior year, went to a career fair, spoke with some of the different company representatives there, including Dow Chemical, met a couple alums from Dow who had been through the chemical engineering program, made a pretty good connection, and ended up getting an internship there. And so, spent summer after junior year, 3 months in West Alexandria, Ohio, population like 750, working in a bromine plant, which was exceptionally dangerous. So it was a good introduction to the industry, but decided I'd like to do that. And after the experience, got an offer to work full time after graduation, and so started in Newark, Delaware, with Dow. So I'd say career fairs, the postings on Penn's different campus recruiting resources. I used all of these heavily, but I'd also say met with a lot of failure in tracking down a lot of those resources. It was very easy to get discouraged. Had a lot of friends. I think I was very fortunate in the internship opportunity. Had a lot of friends who did not get an internship when they were hoping to, did not get an opportunity when they hoped to, but still found some really, really interesting and engaging careers that they're very excited to be pursuing today. So as with Ben, I'd say there's a lot of different pathways, a lot of different opportunities out there. You definitely got to put in the sweat equity to make sure you're putting in some time to work on it. But there are a lot of opportunities available.
That's a great message. Thanks, Dylan. And Miriam, how about you tell us how you found your job and what students can do while they're at Penn to help line up their careers based on your experience? Yeah,
I would say probably my experience is slightly more similar to Dylan's than Ben's, though I would have wished it had been Ben's process. It certainly makes for a great story. When I was nearing graduation, I knew I wanted to move back home to Boston, but I didn't have much of a network there. And particularly in the advocacy space, like networking can be everything. And I'd spent the previous 6 years in DC and in Philly. And, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was a slog. It was a lot of independent research to find jobs online and apply. I had as many informational interviews as possible to try to understand this space that I didn't have as much direct experience in. And it was labor intensive, but it was worth it. And what I would say to those who are interested in the advocacy space, that rather than trying to find the perfect role, I would recommend prioritizing finding an organization that aligns with your values and where you can learn a lot and have opportunities for vertical mobility. In terms of what to do now, developing awareness of a broad set of issues and opinion and sort of develop your opinions can be really helpful. Attending an event like this and the really impressive slate of convenings that the Kleinman Center puts on is really helpful. And, being in a university setting is an unparalleled opportunity to be exposed to such a broad range of topics and expertise. I think all of us are in some ways missing those days, but glad this virtual space allows us to engage more and just take advantage of that. Not everyone does, and those who do will stand to benefit as more competitive candidates in the job space.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that myself. I just graduated in 2019. I was very recently searching for a job out of school, and yeah, it's tough. You face a lot of rejection. I remember from undergrad, I wanted a job in energy engineering, and everyone I contacted said thanks, but no thanks. So I went into business consulting. So your career can go in a really different direction than you might anticipate. But at the same time, if you're really focused on what you want through the Kleinman Center, I found a lot of opportunities to learn and really gain the expertise I wanted that made me a much stronger candidate in my interviews as I was going through the MBA program, both for internships and for full-time offers. Honestly, just going to the seminars and hearing what the experts that the Kleinman Center had invited had to say really did add to my knowledge and improve my ability to stand out as a candidate. So take advantage of it while you can, definitely. Miriam, can you talk a bit more about how you decided you wanted to work in advocacy and how you made that happen specifically?
Yeah, students probably get the question all the time, like, so what do you want to do? And I didn't always have a really specific answer to that, but what I knew was that sort of the answer to what do you want to get out of what you do? And I wanted to feel like I was having an impact on my community and be able to see the results of that in action. And, I've come to realize that changing public policy is the most effective way to enact broad-based change, particularly in the energy and environmental space. Now, I sort of developed this perspective by having a number of roles throughout the federal government, working sort of directly in that policy action. Before coming to Penn, I interned for John Kerry in his Senate office. It's like a few jobs ago for him. It's first piqued my interest in energy and climate issues. Then I worked at the US Department of Energy for 4 years between college and grad school. Then during grad school, I went back to DC for the summer between my first and second years and interned at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. In this time in DC, I learned that, when it comes to energy policy, there needs to be much more connection and communication and understanding between the private sector that sort of owns and operates infrastructure and policymakers who are trying to influence their behavior. And I wanted to help sort of fill that gap to try to build some more efficiency there. So after Penn, I looked for roles that allowed me to do that. I mentioned it's a slog, it's kind of a niche area, but an exciting place to be. I would also add that there's a lot of glamour with federal and international policy, and it's certainly rewarding, but I encourage folks to also consider state and local action. If you're able to act more acutely and quickly and really see the impact of your work on your community, which, for me is why I do it. And so I, encourage to think sort of outside the box about where you might be happy, but I think, advocacy is a really great space to not only be making a lot of change, but to really feel that impact personally.
That's a great message. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of climate action over the past decade has really been at the local level, the state and local level. So that's a great message. So the next question here is about, 2020 was a big year for many reasons. Obviously, there was the pandemic, but we also saw oil prices, declining quite a bit. The world of energy is changing, and just the professional world in general is changing. We're doing this panel digitally right now. So I wanted to ask you all what skills you think are required in this new world that young professionals could maybe be developing while they're still in school. And I'm going to add, I see Molly has asked a question about courses at Penn or other things that students or that you were involved with on campus that helped as you were entering the working world. If you can think of any of those things, courses or other activities that may help fill those needs that we're seeing today as the professional world evolves, it'd be great to hear it. So let's start with you, Ben, if you have any insight for us.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a number of really pressing areas that we see now. I'll start off with the 2020 aspect of this. Obviously, we're in unprecedented times with a global pandemic and all of the political upheaval we've had in this country in particular. But I really think there are a lot of opportunities, and I'll basically talk about two things here. Number one are the opportunities for science and technology, in my view, to be integrated in national security policy, because we've seen, in the moment we're at right now, the dawn of the Biden-Harris administration really has raised transatlantic confidence that American leadership can be restored. I'm certainly encouraged and excited, from domestic issues like addressing political, economic, and racial divisions, to fighting against creeping authoritarianism and other transnational threats abroad. The challenges are high, but the expectations are also high, and that's a part of, if you're interested, as Miriam said, in advocacy or in political work and things like this. There's a lot of opportunities, but at the same time, that there's rightly this prioritization of fact-based, science-oriented policymaking. I've seen the hashtag, science is back when it comes to the government. That's incredibly important. And making good on this commitment is more pressing than ever, not only because of things like COVID-19 and fighting climate change, which are incredibly important, but also trying to get science and technology into more, traditional areas of U.S. Diplomacy and foreign policy. I'm actually a fellow with the Duke Center for International and Global Studies Rethinking Diplomacy program, where we're working on this right now. I'm doing this outside of my, in my free time, basically, but looking at how Washington and Brussels can jointly address bringing in more scientists and technologists into the policy process, and also, I should say, into the energy policy process when it comes to national security issues. Because I think for a lot of folks, you kind of have these segmented science policy areas, let's say, as I said, like climate change and in pandemics, that are obvious science questions. But when you look at some of the trends that we face in the transatlantic community in terms of threats, whether it's through energy infrastructure, telecommunications, or other critical infrastructure investments, when Russia and China are involved, you have authoritarian regimes that are using these infrastructure projects sometimes for strategic corruption and elite capture and things like this, where they're undermining liberal democratic norms. And this administration has really prioritized, stepping up and leading a global coalition of democracies. So as this goes on, you really need to have a multidisciplinary focus where you're looking at the traditional foreign policy, national security challenges, but also how can science and technology, if you have a scientist or a technologist in the room, in the policymaking, decision-making room, how can you actually, maybe not overlook something where maybe there's an obvious practical science or technology analysis or tool or something like that can solve some of these transnational issues that we have. So so with all of that, that's a sort of ethos and work that I've done both in government and outside of government as I'm continuing my science career. But what I would say for students that are on campus right now, I was at this physics and astronomy department at Penn, which was a tremendous experience and really offered a lot of opportunities both for learning and for career growth. But what I still kick myself to this day for not doing, and I should have reached out more, is going and attending events. The Kleinman Center, as I understand, wasn't actually there wasn't incorporated when I was on campus, but going to other areas of campus, whether it's the Perry World House, the Penn Biden Center, areas of campus that I wouldn't normally have looked at, and kind of go, because you have all of these world-class talks and world-class academics that you can interface with while you're on campus. And that's something I've tried to prioritize now that I'm at Harvard, even though I'm not a student. During my work is trying to take, carve out an hour here or there during the week and go to a talk or speak with a professor on issues that are multidisciplinary and outside of your career focus, because I think that will open up opportunities as well.
Thanks. I think that's a great message, integrating science and policy and flexing those multidisciplinary muscles, and just being flexible, I think is probably a good thing to be pursuing right now, for everyone. Miriam, what about you? At what skills can our audience work on developing right now?
Yeah, so I had like a slightly different experience academically, I would say, or like in that exposure than Ben, in that the Kleinman Center was started in my time at Penn. It had just been off the ground, and by engaging in the certificate program, I was able to take courses outside of my school and be able to they were curated to provide that department's perspective on energy and environmental issues. So I was at the School of Government, but I took courses at a course at the engineering school at was it the Weitzman School now, design school, in environmental policy, a class at Wharton, and that provided a sort of broader based education for me, and particularly in a non-technical field. It was really helpful to be able to be exposed to that different type of thinking that approached the same sort of issues. So I'd say that, for those who, are not in their very last semester, but who might have time to enroll in some of those courses, I recommend it. And Kleinman was a really great resource for me in sort of curating those and even creating some independent coursework that allowed that sort of interdisciplinary exposure. But I think Ben's right that there's so many just, sort of extracurricular things in terms of lectures and, speakers and things to go to. There's case competitions and things that I was a part of that were really helpful too, to get sort of that exposure to other students who are thinking about things in different ways. And that will prepare you really well for the really, the very interdisciplinary world that we live in. I would say, just thinking about how COVID and this new space is sort of framing and reframing the work that I do and that, in the advocacy space, I would say that, we've thought a lot about energy and environmental issues as intersectional with the economy for a really long time. And that's been a big part of how these, this sort of science and economy have come together in our advocacy. But, COVID in particular, but as well as just other issues that have come to light over the last, or become more a part of the national conversation in the last year, have really shown that we need to underscore sort of the health and equity implications of everything that we're putting forward. And so, when we're thinking about how to articulate our policy agenda for any audience, even thinking about a more traditional business audience, that, how does this, renewable energy, renewable portfolio standard increase affect the health of our community? Or how does it ameliorate systemic injustice? And, I think that's having that broader perspective of how these are all intersectional issues will be incredibly valuable to anyone who's trying to enter this space. I would say also, we've seen here like this, virtual space that we would not have been operating in a year ago, that being flexible and adaptable is really important. And when thinking about, when I'm looking at potential candidates for internships or jobs, that, someone who is able to pivot quickly and adapt to a new space will quickly rise to the top, and being able to sort of not only be exposed to a whole host of different ideas, but able to sort of operate in different modes. And so I would say that, getting that exposure to a wide range of perspectives is useful, but also think about, getting outside your comfort zone and being sort of flexible and adaptable.
Thanks, Miriam. I think that's a great message. I took a class at the law school, actually, as part of obtaining my Kleinman certificate, and it was one of the best classes I took while I was at Penn. So, yeah, definitely encourage all of you, if you're still a student, if you can, try to take a class outside of your school. Great. And lastly, Dylan, what skills do you think are needed out in the market today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, definitely echo what Ben and Miriam have said, and I'd say, in terms of specifics, like actual skills, to one that I'm really happy I got at Penn, and one that I regret not getting. The one I'm really happy I got at Penn was statistics and data analysis. So Econ 103 is statistics for economists. Econ 104 is econometrics. There's engineering economics. There's or engineering statistics, excuse me. There's a ton of different stats options at Penn, and it is absolutely the most useful knowledge base that I've had going into engineering. I don't ever work with Raoult's law and all of the really complicated engineering concepts necessarily that I learned as an engineer in the chemical engineering department. What I use and what I used as a process engineer was my data analysis skills that I got through taking the stats classes in the econ department, and also through working with the Kleinman Center and writing policy digests and being able to analyze, you know, oil shipment data or production numbers, whatever it would be. You know, as an ops leader now, I'm looking at metrics on a regular basis, and being able to have a really strong data literacy is important wherever you're going to go, whether you're going as a process engineer, whether you want to do research, whether you want to do policy. You need to be able to understand how to interpret and work with data and numbers. And it also just, you know, will help you in your everyday life, you know, evaluate news and news stories, whatever it would be. So, you know, an understanding of numbers and data analysis, really, really critical. And I think the thing that also really made me stand out in a lot of my interviews for my full-time position as a process engineer, my industry is very data driven. Semiconductors are very process and quality driven. They are looking at millions of data points in a fab, in a wafer fab, where they're trying to interpret and understand what goes on. And coming in, I was speaking the same language as the engineers who were trying to hire me. And I think it was a real differentiator. The one that I regret that I don't have is software. And you don't need to be a, you know, whatever genius, you know, coder, whatever you want to call it. You don't need to be able to write your own apps, but a baseline level of, hey, I can take Excel and write a halfway decent macro. I can, you know, teach myself to use a scripting program like SAS Jump for data analysis, or learn how to, you know, do some calls for different data from online, whatever it would be. I started Sys 110 and dropped out after the first week and took the MATLAB course instead. And I definitely wish I would have paid more attention in the MATLAB class and probably not dropped out of the Sys 110 class. But I'd say, you know, really, there are two skills that I think any place in the workplace, in whatever industry you're going into, whatever position you want to hold, you know, having some baseline software skills, having some baseline, you know, coding, and then having data literacy and the ability to work well with data sets and analyze data is going to be really critical. It's something I look for with anybody that we're trying to hire on the engineering end. Yeah.
Thanks, Dylan. I'll echo that. I've seen that exact same experience in my various roles in business operations and in finance. It's really important to understand statistics, to be able to work in Excel and not just, you know, do a little bit of math, but in finance, there are very intricate models. And that was a skill I could have sharpened a bit more while I was in school, and I've had to sharpen it on the job, but I would have hit the ground running had I sharpened it more as a student. So yeah, definitely echo the point about making sure you're literate in statistics and just basic coding literacy too. So I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. I think we've started answering some of these, but don't be shy. We're a pretty small group here, so go ahead and start submitting. Really quickly, just one last question that I had planned that I think might be valuable. Dylan, and then if others want to chime in on this too, what insight do you have for students that are considering or maybe avoiding careers in the petrochemical and fossil industry? Obviously, there's been a lot of, I guess, turbulence in the oil and gas and potentially the petrochemical space. So it'd be great to hear from you all a perspective on that. Should students be open-minded? The company I work at has a long tradition of doing work in the for the oil and gas industry. So yeah.
Sure. Great question. And it's a, you know, a nuanced answer. You know, I guess the first thing for, you know, in folks who are looking to go into these industries and maybe worried about their future, right? Two things. You know, we had, I think you know, Daniel Yergin came to speak at the Kleinman Center a couple of years ago. You know, oil industry luminary, energy industry luminary, I'd say, and you know, a big part of his speech was things take time. Right. We're not talking about an industry, you know, or a society in 50 years where there is no oil, right? Perhaps peak oil, perhaps massively reduced consumption of oil. But that industry and many others supporting it are not going away as rapidly as we might think. Even with a lot of policy, momentum perhaps in that direction. I'd also say that DuPont does not make gunpowder anymore. And that's what they made in 18 whatever when they were founded, right? I was going to say, Netflix isn't shipping DVDs. Industries reinvent themselves, right? My little corner of DuPont is working on semiconductors, and there's a huge market for that, and it's growing very quickly. So I think these companies are also very aware of the changing market conditions of the future of their industries, and I cannot speak for any companies, obviously, but from my observation, they're also pretty smart about, hey, in 30 years this business might be a lot smaller, and we need to figure out where we're going to make an impact and where we're going to deliver value for our shareholders in the future. And even if that's not the case, powering down plants and safely doing so, and cutting costs and finding cost efficiencies is a big part of what a lot of engineers do, and what a lot of safety and environmental managers do, is figuring out how to shut down some of these plants safely. So I think there's still plenty of room in this industry for people who are aspiring to be part of it. Will it look different than had you gone into it in the 90s? Absolutely. Is there going to be turbulence? Absolutely. I really wanted to go into oil and gas coming out of school in 2016. There was a pretty substantial slide in oil. I don't think they hired anybody from our class. So there is that ups and downs, but certainly there is, I think there's real future in the industry. It just may be different than what you're expecting now, which kind of speaks to some of Ben and Miriam's point about adaptability, about building some of your skill sets so that you can apply them, to a distillation column or to a solar panel. And obviously that's a very, very, silly example, but that's, yeah, if that answers the question, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the transformation, both for companies and for people looking to launch a career. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of opportunity at my own company to learn and take a leadership role in this transformation. So it's certainly interesting. We have a lot of questions here. Let's go with Kenneth's question. So when you're thinking about hiring people at your organization, what background or experience is the most important in your field? Maybe just a quick answer from each of you. Ben, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure. I guess I have kind of two areas. I mean, in astrophysics, having a physics degree is important, obviously, but there are opportunities for people as some of these projects get larger, like some of these multinational collaborations, working on astronomy, working on physics, working on energy areas in terms of research. There's a need for project managers. There's a need for process engineers. There's a need for all parts of the value chain from production of instrumentation all the way through science analysis and coding and things like that. So there's a broad set of skills that are hireable in basic research, no matter what the focus of that basic research is. I'm mentioning some physics areas, but the same thing goes for what Dylan's working on, and the broader gamut of possibilities in the energy space. I think that there's kind of the same dynamic. I often say that whether I'm building a large scale telescope installation in a remote part of the world, or if you look at how large scale energy infrastructure, whether it's upstream, midstream, or downstream pipelines, rigs, things like this, as they get built, they have the same sort of project development process. So having that skill set as well is incredibly important. And whether it's petrochemical based or hydrocarbon based, or it's moving towards renewables or future energy technologies like fusion. I started my career in high energy density physics at a fusion research plant in Rochester, New York. And those are the sort of things that all need this sort of skill set and is extremely hireable, I think, working at the intersection of these emerging technologies and traditional engineering and science and business and project management and project development and things like this. So I think there's this wide range. Julie, I think you said you were at Wharton, so that sort of background is important as well. But again, I can't stress enough, I think all of these areas that we're discussing today are very multidisciplinary. So taking advantage of the opportunities both on campus, off campus, and keeping an open mind going forward. The one nice thing that I'll add before I close this is on COVID-19 is that it's kind of opened up the lecture space, the ability to attend things on campuses all around the world, which didn't exist when we were completely in person and things weren't streamed online. So that's important as well. And it's kind of, democratized our access to information even more, though we're, also stuck in our apartments forever. So pro and con.
Yeah, definitely. Miriam, what about you? Skills for policy, specifically things you look for when you're hiring?
Yeah, definitely strong writing skills, but I would say not, not necessarily in sort of my space, sort of, writing a 50, 100-page research report, but how do you digest really complex interdisciplinary topics and distill that to like 5 bullet points? Like, how can you make it digestible by a layman? A lawmaker by design is a generalist. They need to be able to navigate all sorts of public policy issues that come their way. You might have folks who are on a committee or someone who's the secretary of an agency or a senior official that might specialize a little bit more, but being able to articulate like, what is the issue? What is the solution we're proposing? Who does it impact? How much does it cost? Like as succinctly as possible, backing it up with the more sort of in-depth research and understanding and expertise, but being able to succinctly translate complex topics into sort of bite-sized, sort of intersectional, easily digestible bullet points is really, really key, and it's a developed skill set. And so I think that's something that that FELS definitely focuses on when thinking about as folks working in the public policy space. But I do think it's something that can be developed independently. But I do, I would encourage people to sort of try to flex those muscles and think about if you had to explain this to someone who, you have 5 minutes of their time, how would you convince them?
Yeah, definitely agree. That's an essential skill. Concise communication. Dylan, what about you? And really quick, I actually can't see the Q&A anymore. So Dylan, while you're answering, maybe our other panelists could pick some questions they'd like to address.
Sure. So, I'd mentioned the two that I already mentioned. If you can come in to an interview for an engineering position with some data literacy, some statistics, as well as some software ability, that's a huge plus, because you're just going to function better in all aspects of your role. I definitely second Miriam's point. We have a daily production meeting that's 30 minutes long and 40 people have to talk. You don't get even 5 minutes, you get 30 seconds to tell me what the problem is with your machine and how you're going to fix it. And, so definitely being able to speak clearly, quickly, concisely, and to deliver a point or summarize a complex issue into a few quick bullet points is really critical. The last thing, and recognizing that I'm not following my own advice here as I talk, but the last thing I'd put in there is just the ability to coordinate well and do stakeholder engagement. So, definitely, I'm sure Miriam has a lot to say about stakeholder engagement, but if you're running a project as a project manager, or if you're trying to implement a new process in a manufacturing facility, you need to be able to effectively coordinate between a lot of different teams with competing interests, with competing metrics, with sometimes competing incentives, right? So, the engineering team wants to come in and put in a new reactor, and they're going to have to take up some of the production time on the floor. They're going to have to take maintenance resources. They're going to have to justify their costs. Being able to work sort of with a wide array of people, really critical, and something we look for when we're, hearing about others' backgrounds and experiences in interviews. You know, coming into industry or coming out of school, you know, a lot of times that's extracurricular activities, things that you've done where, hey, you know, I organized this event for a club, or I, you know, worked to put together this panel, something like that, you know, and something you can speak, you know, very clearly to, can be really helpful as a way to sort of stand out of like, wow, that's an impressive event to be able to put together. Must have taken a lot of coordination. I'd feel confident that when you have to coordinate the response to an incident or something like that, you're going to be able to do so as well.
Yeah, 100%. I found myself talking about my extracurricular activities a lot more than my classwork in most of my interviews. So looks like Angela has been asking about internship experience opportunities abroad. So anyone have thoughts on if that would be possible these days? I know for Bechtel Enterprises, we are going through recruiting for MBA students right now for interns. I assume that would be remote, but we do have offices around the world, and there are certainly opportunities to do work even remotely or from the DC office that may impact an international development opportunity. You may be on calls with people in Australia or something like that. So I think there's still opportunity to get that international experience, even if you can't physically go. But I'd love to hear from the rest of you.
I guess I'll just say I did not have a broad opportunity while I was in school, but had a couple of classmates who spoke very highly of the experience, both just from like a personal sort of fulfillment and satisfaction standpoint. You know, really excellent memories from those experiences that they've shared, and look back very fondly on them. And also some connections and sort of lifelong friends. You know, depending on which school you're in and what you're trying to do. You know, sometimes you can take classes. So I had a friend who took some classes while on a summer abroad, and, you know, it helped them with their major as well. So, you know, I think it's probably a very positive experience. I'm not sure how available it is to everybody, you know, very sort of situation and major dependent, I would imagine.
Yeah, I also unfortunately did not see any international study opportunities while I was at Penn, but you know, I would say that, you know, in the energy policy space, we're, you know, looking to sort of new and innovative ideas everywhere. And as Julie sort of mentioned before, particularly working at the state level, that, you know, we think a lot about piloting new ideas and being able to replicate them at the federal level or in other states around the country. And so, you know, even, you know, having graduated, there are still sort of like a broad opportunities planned where we have like learning trips for businesses or policymakers, and things like offshore wind is a really big issue in New England and spreading sort of down the East Coast. We're looking for fully operational offshore wind farms to learn from. We have to go to Europe, you know, to learn that. And, you know, I think some of that exposure while you're in school can be really helpful when thinking about places that are doing things differently, you know, and thinking about innovative transportation policies that a lot of people are going down to Colombia and see what they're doing, you know, that there's, you know, opportunities to think about who's doing things differently, that even if you want to work in the United States, I think, you know, to get that exposure early, that I'm sure would help to be a competitive candidate for a job as well.
And I'll add to that that, you know, from the science side of my career, astronomy is by definition a very international field. Every collaboration I've been part of has had representatives from almost every continent. I had the opportunity while at Penn to not only travel to our site in South America quite a bit, but also work with collaborators on either research trips or at conferences and things like this. That included going to Europe quite a bit, and included going to the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa quite a bit as well. So it really, you have the the opportunities there in the public policy and foreign policy space. I think obviously having international experiences is important. Whether or not it's an internship or something like that, as both Miriam and Dylan said, there's different sort of opportunities out there. learning trips and things like this. I would say if we have any undergrads in the audience, another opportunity that you can look at are these, some of the post-undergrad, pre-grad school or pre-career sort of fellowship or scholarship opportunities. I actually did a Fulbright fellowship in Germany between undergrad and coming to Penn. And that was a really tremendous experience, even though I focused on, I applied for a research project that was focused on research adjacent to the hydrogen density physics work I did as a researcher as an undergraduate. It was very much a transformational experience for me because, first of all, Fulbright is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, so that kind of opened up my eyes to foreign policy and that sort of thing, but also to be in a cohort of people working on a lot of different social sciences, economics, and public policy backgrounds, because Fulbright, for example, is not particularly known as a research, science research centric fellowship, although it is, I think, becoming that more equitable in that space. But again, those are the sort of opportunities abroad that can really be transformational. I think that taking an opportunity to apply for funding or apply for these programs is always really important.
Awesome. Yeah, I 100% agree. I didn't have a chance to study abroad in undergrad. It's tough with an engineering degree. But I've sought out international opportunities, in personal life, and through Wharton, there were various trips, educational and leadership oriented international trips that I took advantage of and that have helped fill in the gaps and were definitely valuable when interviewing with an international company like Bechtel, where being able to speak another language or having international experience is really important. I probably have the lowest qualification level out of all of my colleagues in that department, but it helps having something. So I would definitely encourage everyone who can. I know it's difficult in these times, but if you can't study abroad right now, maybe, or you can't get into a program that you wanted that was international, maybe work on your language skills or do some research in a new market. Great. Well, with that, we're pretty much out of time. Thank you so much to our panelists. This was a really great discussion. I learned a lot, and I hope that our students and other colleagues will walk away having learned something too and found this valuable. For more energy policy, the Kleinman Center is also hosting a conversation with Leah Stokes a week from today at noon, and you can register for that event on the Kleinman Center website. So with that, I think we'll close out. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to our panelists, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie, and yeah, definitely thanks to the Kleinman Center. Awesome event.